Okay, today we're going to be building, and I'll show you how to do this, a Porter Cable 18-volt cordless biscuit joiner. If you're familiar with the Porter Cable 18-volt lineup, and you look all over the Porter Cable website, you will never find this tool on there. Why? Because it doesn't exist. You might want to call this a Franken tool. This is given birth out of a regular Porter Cable 18-volt grinder and a sacrificial Harbor Freight biscuit joiner. Watch this video and I'll show you how it's done. At the end we'll have some parts left over that you can recycle or discard as you please, but this is the holy grail right now of what we're building, so you can expand your 18-volt lineup and add a new tool so you can do more things. Follow along and enjoy. For the tools that we're going to need to do this job, we're going to need a crescent wrench, a sliding wrench, a set of metric Allen wrenches, pair of snap ring pliers, needle nose pliers, a selection of Phillips and flathead screwdrivers. I use a pair of regular pliers, also have a hammer for good measure. On the snap ring pliers, I prefer the ones that have the angled jaws at the top. Those just seem to work very well for me. And then obviously the tools that come with it for being able to remove either the wheel off the original grinder or being able to remove the blade off the biscuit grinder and be able to separate that. Also, what's not shown here is a 25/64 drill bit that I used in my drill press to be able to enlarge the hole, as you'll see later in this video. The drill press might not be necessary, but it's just a nice way that I could get a square hole. If you got a drill press, that would be extremely helpful as well. So today we're going to work on taking the Porter Cable 18-volt grinder and attaching the fence off the Chicago Electric Harbor Freight 4-inch biscuit joiner onto our Porter Cable 18-volt grinder so we can have a cordless Porter Cable biscuit joiner. Stay with us and I'll show you how it's done. Okay, so now to get this process started of converting the grinder, obviously I've got the battery off the grinder here, so there's no chance of it's going to start. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and take off the side handle off the Porter Cable, and we'll set that aside. And then the next step, on the back, the grinder comes with a spanner wrench that looks like this, and we're going to need to actually put that spanner wrench to use, as well as the blade stop that's on top. So once we find the blade and the sweet spot where the blade lock will engage, which looks to be right about there. With that engage, I'm going to use my spanner wrench. Loosen the nut that's holding on my metal cutting blade at the moment here. So with that, I'm going to take off my disc, and then I can take my guard off as well. This should come off like this, as well as the bushing that was on the nut. So now I've got my grinder head that looks like this. I've got my spanner wrench that went with the original one. We'll set those parts aside. And then now we have to work on disassembling the Harbor Freight tool. We'll begin that by removing the dust collection bag. That's not going to be needed right now. And then on the side of this, you notice there's the handle on either side. So that's probably going to be a metric wrench since this is Harbor Freight. And we'll see. Oh, just a little smaller. Guess that might be a M8. I'll use my hex wrenches to pull that off. Yep, that's an M8 size. And then we'll have one nut off there. Repeat the process on the other side. hand loose now. Pay attention not to lose the washers. And now I've got a handle off of there, and let's do a quick test fit to see how this is going to work on the Porter cable. Looks like it's going to be just a little snug, but it should fit almost perfectly on the Porter cable grinder, and so you can see how this is starting to take shape. Of course, I could just use a simple screw-in handle as well, but I kind of like this overmold handle here for a dedicated biscuit joiner. On either tool, make sure it is not plugged in. The cord for this one here is unplugged from the wall socket, so I know there's no chance this is going to come on. The carbide teeth on this are sharp and could cut off a finger if you're not careful. On the bottom plate here, we've got a flat metal plate here that we're going to go ahead and have to remove the screws with a Phillips head screwdriver. There are 4 screws. There we go. Now it's coming off. The head's partially stripped, unfortunately, but we got the screw off. And now this plate comes off, and we can see the blade on the Harbor Freight tool. Remember, it did come with a spanner wrench that's designed to fit the fittings on the Harbor Freight tool, and we can see how that goes together and how the dust collection kicks it out the back where the saw blade turns and throws the dust into the chute and then into the bag. On the top of the tool, there is a yellow blade lock here, so we'll have to find the sweet spot for where that engages, right about there. And I'll put the spanner wrench in and begin the process of trying to loosen this up to remove the blade. I'm going to fold up the front of the fence here, so now I can at least hopefully set this down. This is going to require a little bit more persuasion than what I thought initially. There we go. Now I got it to break. And so then with this off, with the nut, I'll set down that on top here, and we'll pull out the saw blade just like that. So now the blade is off, and that is disconnected from the side, and there's the backing off of the blade. So now we can see where this looks almost identical to just a regular old angle grinder. Now we have to get the fence removed off the side here, so then we can move it on and over to the Porter cable. As I look at the way this is configured here, it appears like there are 4 screws that are going to be key for us. There's 2 screws buried back here and 2 screws up here that surround the housing for the front of the gearbox. So now we'll begin the process of removing these screws here. So there, let's see if we can get these to pop out. There we go, that pops out. And that pops out. And then now we've got 2 more screws to remove. There we go, and then this whole assembly pops off. You can see there's the grease inside the motor. What we're left with here is the geared top here, and we can see how this the part of the biscuit grinder here is attached all the way across and actually built all the way into the fence, where the gearing and the teeth on the gearing for it is actually part of the head of the grinder all the way through. So now we're going to have to hope on the Porter cable we can combine this gear, or that sprocket, with what's on the Porter cable. So now the similar assembly on the Porter cable here, it looks like this, and we're going to have to pop that off as well. Put this back together. We may need to use these black screws again because they're obviously tapped to fit what's on the other side of here. And on the bottom of this, you can see in this assembly here, we've got another gear assembly here and the lubrication in there, as well as the other sprocket there that rotates to create this. Let's see if we can put these side by side here just for a comparison in size, and grab a tape measure. For comparison purposes, the one on the Harbor Freight is approximately just about 2 1/4 inches, and the one coming off of the Porter cable one is just under or right at 2 inches. So we'll see if that creates an issue or not based on the size, but that may be a first warning that there may be a little issue in front of us. As we see here, as we look down on the Harbor Freight assembly, we can still see these 2 screw holes back here still have their screws in. So we're going to have to release those screws so we can put in the Porter cable screws that are tapped to fit the Porter cable unit, and to free those so that we can get those out. You can see they're stuck right here and creating a little release or break from the spring. So now I've got the housing here. I've got to get the screw out of here that we left in before. I'll cover up the housing here to see if we can keep that screw out of the lithium grease. And there we go, there's that screw out. So now we got all 4 screws there out of our grinder. And let's begin to see if we can start any form of reassembly. Unfortunately, it seems that actually, maybe that will work. However, the holes here on top don't quite line up right. Let's see if this will actually work. So it looks like this actually will fit in and embed. We've got a couple issues here with these screws. Hopefully once I can get that figured out, then we can get this attached. So let me figure that out and we'll be right back. Okay, so I've got the front of this inside my bench vise here, and it looks like we're going to have to detach the front from the rear of the fence here, and there's a couple rubber plugs on the front. Got one pulled out there. Now I've got to use just a small flathead screwdriver to go pop out the other rubber plug in the front, and that will reveal a couple of Phillips head screws that we should be able to use and disassemble. Should be able to remove the front of the vise, or the front of the fence, so that then we can slide out the assembly to be able to remove that final screw from the rear of the fence here. So now that we have that off, we'll set that aside, and I'll take this out of the vise so that my hand is clear. And if I tip this down, it now should. Okay, so after some additional testing, it seems like the gear on the Harbor Freight biscuit joiner here is not compatible directly with the gearing inside the Porter Cable angle grinder. So I'm going to have to be able to swap out the gears off of this and the fitting we took off of the Porter Cable. On both of these, it's hard to tell very carefully here, but it's easier to see on the grinder here. There's a small little retaining ring that's got to be popped off. There's another one also on the Porter Cable that has to be popped off to be able to free the gear and the assembly here to be able to reset it. What I'm hoping to be able to do is to be able to then separate that out and then reset that in place. So let's see how this goes. So using a handy pair of retaining ring pliers. It looks like the problem right now is my teeth here when I get this out are not able to span the width of that. So I'm going to change the teeth on my retaining ring pliers and be right back. Okay, so now I've got right angle jaws on my retaining ring pliers, and let's see if that will make this any easier. It's important when you're working with retaining rings or other tools like this where you've got the fastener here under tension. Always, always, always make sure you're wearing a pair of safety glasses. You never know where this is going to snap at if you go the other way. It's better to be safe than sorry. Just like when using any other tool, there we go with that ring out. You can see that just kind of popped off there. So with that retaining ring off, let's see what that means we can do. So in this case here, with that ring off, we can slide this gear and a washer of it just right off that Harbor Freight column. And I'm going to take, because of the grease on it, I'm just going to protect it here with a piece of just a regular cloth. We may need that ring later. And to keep my parts organized, I'll put that retaining ring clip with that. I'll leave the rest of the grease in place. And I'll come back over here and work on the retaining ring clip off of the grinder, off of the Porter Cable grinder piece. You can see the retaining ring is starting to become a little more visible here through the grease. I'm going to repeat the same process here. I'm going to use my retaining ring pliers. This is a pair that's capable of doing both internal and external ring pliers. There's a couple different sizes of these pliers. This is the smaller of the two commonly available sizes. These are certainly obviously not the most common tool that a lot of people have in their shop, but they appear to be necessary for this project. Two screwdrivers on either side. Let's see if we can pop this gear off. There we go. Now with the right convincing here, you can see that sprocket just lifting right off. And that should come off just like that. So let's now bring the Porter Cable part, the Harbor Freight part back in, and then we will drop down the shaft here. When we look at the sprocket here on the Porter Cable, maybe if you can see this with the light, but there is a slight key to the shaft hole. important that this gets squared up on the shaft. If I take out a pair of dial calipers, and I look at the Harbor Freight shaft, comes in there. And with my dial calipers, it's hard to be able to see a distinctive difference between the two. When I look at the insides of the sprockets, I'm just trying to see if there's any sort of like a grease piece where the grease might have somehow changed it. Okay, so it's not the top, it's actually going to be this bottom part here that's the trouble. Let me use the micrometer again, and we will measure just by looking at the two. It's hard to be able to see a distinctive difference, even with the micrometer, other than I'm just going to take a little small piece of the blue rag and see if I can clean out the inside of the Porter Cable sprocket. I just want to make sure there's not any excess grease buildup in there that's accumulating and blocking its ability to properly seat itself. There we go, that's much cleaner. And so with any tighter machining tolerances, hopefully that will allow it to be set, but we're still having the same troubles as before, getting over the hurdle to even get on to where I can put down and set the lock ring in place. Okay, so now with safety glasses on, I'm going to actually go ahead and chuck this up into my drill press, and then I'm going to use a strip of sandpaper and be able to see if I can just smooth out any imperfections on that shaft here with the spinning on the drill press to keep it smooth. Make sure you're wearing safety glasses. Okay, so I've tried making several adjustments here, so I'm going to try just drilling out this. I've set this up on my drill press with a 25/64 inch drill bit, which should be just about the right size. So it'll be just a little bit snug, but hopefully we can just drill this out a little bit here and then get this going. Okay, now with my ring back on place, it's just kind of a friction fit at this point here. I'm going to see about seating this right back into the grinder here. And I know not all these holes line up just right, but if I spin this shaft just right, everything seems to be lining up well. And let's give this a quick dry test. If you're going to test this, always make sure you've got your safety glasses on. I can't say that enough, kids. And so now we're going to give this here, with the Porter Cable sprocket in place, just a quick little. You can see that it came out. It was running at first. Let's see if that will hold it down. Okay, so now we've got the right gearing in there. We just have to reattach this plate back down. And then with this plate back down, we just have to be able to drop in the screws and then reattach our blade and reattach the back fence, reattach the springs, and then we're going to be good to go. I've clearly already voided the warranty on the grinder, so that's not a concern. But now as I try to put this fence back on, I can only get either this screw in the rear or this screw on the other side in the rear to actually line up with the threaded socket on the Porter Cable grinder. I'm going to go ahead and choose the one when it's upside down that's on the left side, or when you're holding it properly on the right side. The other 3 screw holes here are going to remain empty. Unfortunately, I'm not going to be able to tap out the other ones because they're going to go just right through the side. One of the other issues that you can tell when this is put back together is you can see there's an open area here on the side between the top of the Porter Cable, the top of the biscuit joining piece and the bottom of the grinder head right up here. That grease may leak from. I'll see if I can get like a rubber band or some way I can squeeze a gasket around through there, or maybe just tie it off in some way. Perhaps if I had some foam or something else, I might be able to tie that together just to be able to seal it off. Unfortunately, that's just kind of bare and potentially could cause a grease leak. I'm not particularly happy about that. I just have to be careful and just see how I hold it to keep it from the grease from accumulating or splattering around. Maybe I'll just take a nice little piece of duct tape, since this is all silver, and just clean that up just to make sure I've got a nice little shroud there to hold in that. So unfortunately, this means I'm only going to have 1 screw here instead of 4 holding this down. It feels like it should be pretty secure. I'm not sure if that's my overall preference or I'm completely satisfied with that, but for the amount I plan on using it, it's probably fine. As you can clearly see, this may present a safety hazard to someone using this. So obviously your mileage may vary, you may get hurt, die, be injured. You know the drill when it comes to safety precautions and using power tools. So now that this is on, the next thing we need to do is to go back and take the saw blade, and we're going to match. There's an angle of rotation on the saw blade and an angle here, so then this is going to line up. But if you remember, we had a couple set of jaws that this rested on. That lines up, so we're going to put in the bottom jaw there and the jaw here, and this will tighten down with our spanner wrench. In this case here, we're going to use our Harbor Freight spanner wrench because that's what's actually designed to fit this here, not the Porter Cable one, and we'll press the switch at the bottom to be able to tighten this down so that we can have our biscuit laid tightly in place. Now that that's in place, you can see I've got this tightened down. This is ready there with the grinder, and that's all seated there. So the next step here would be then applying the safety shield. That goes over the base, just like this. Make sure you line up your holes, and we'll start replacing our screws just the way that we took them off. Except for now, this is actually on the Porter Cable unit. Okay, so now we got the back plate on. Now we're ready to install the plate here in front. So I left the screws in here from before, so these are just going to get tightened down on either side. Then there's a couple little rubber gaskets that will go in there that will help serve as a work stop. Tighten those down. Now we have these little rubber stops here that we're going to go ahead and put back in those holes to cover those up. And this will be in place there to then grip our work. So now we've got that. And you can see where now this will come back out. Hides the blade. And then we can make the change. One little thing here, I had the fence down so I can roll that back up. One thing here, the fence depth though does not work. If I go to the lowest depth setting, it will get stuck on the head of the grinder. It's just a slightly different shape. As long as we're not using really small stock, we should be fine. And so now we've got that in place, and the tool is back together except for the dust bag. So we'll put the dust bag on the side. And now we have our Porter Cable cordless 18 volt grinder. We'll put this to test here in just a second. Let me get a piece of stock set up in the vise, and then we will make our first test cut. So one last little thing that we need to do is we also need to add on top our handle over the top here, so we got some extra support here when it comes to setting this up here. So this handle should go down here, and we've got our bolts. And then we can then so we'll get our hex key out here once we get this lined up here, and these bolts are the same size on both units. So now it's just a matter of setting this in and making the attachment. Okay, so after making a few more adjustments, I think we got everything together here. We're going to put our safety glasses here. One thing here to keep in mind is because this references off of the rest of the assembly, all of our fence should still be fine. The naked eye, it looks like in front that this, keep in mind there's only the one screw attaching it here, that it might actually be off by just a little bit. We'll see how this cut goes here and see how it performs. Okay, so now with a couple more adjustments made, we're going to go ahead and put our 18 volt Porter Cable Biscuit grinder to a test here and cut our first biscuit slot here. And so I'm going to square the fence up here. Okay, well it seems like there's just a little bit of an issue here. We can see how deep the slot got. Took a couple tries. It seems like when the blade binds up a little bit, the grinder wants to come to a halt before I plunge all the way to full depth. To be fair, perhaps the issue is a dying lithium battery, because as we know when lithium batteries start to go, they don't go completely. It's an all or once, but it seems to keep going. So perhaps the blade's binding or something's binding there. We've got the power off here, or at least I got the... Okay, so now we're going to make a test cut here. One change I've discovered we had to make was going with the larger EX battery, or perhaps a smaller LX battery I used before. It just wasn't quite enough. Either way, this is going to require quite a bit of power to get through. So we've got the fence squared up here, and we're going to go into this 2x4 here and make our first biscuit. We'll execute this by pushing forward, and the blade will be exposed, as you can see. And so let's see for a quick test cut here. And as we look at the cut, we can see the biscuit joint right there on the face. I wasn't holding this extremely precise as I was just trying to do a quick demo cut, but I think you get the picture of how this can work. And the last little change, and it's hard to see here, is I ended up adding a screw at the top. Up here, this is just a self-tapping wood screw, but enough to be able to dig into the, to be able to tap a thread into the side of the metal housing here in front. It would be able to hold the everything all square. Maybe I'll be able to add a rubber gasket in there in the future, but as you can see now, we now have a fully functional Porter Cable 18-volt biscuit joiner made possible with parts from our Harbor Freight sacrificial biscuit joiner. So I hope you found this intriguing, and have a great day. Bye.